Make it stop, Sam. Please make it stop. I'm talking about these social media keyboard warriors who are criticizing my mayor and council, and now they're texting me and calling me at all hours of night.
Joe, calm down. I've got a solution.
What? Please, it's a nightmare.
Social media training for local elected officials.
Okay, I'm buying what you're selling. Tell me more.
We know that the elected officials actually are the culprits, right? They're the ones that get spun up, and they're the ones that are causing problems. So what if we could train them to rethink the way they see social media?
You mean to not overreact and drive us crazy?
Exactly. To understand that these people are not actually representative of the community, and to really learn how to deal with the keyboard warriors appropriately, which means not calling your city manager at 3:00 in the morning.
I love it. Tell me how we can learn more, how we can get signed up. I need this now.
So if you go to civysocial.com/AAME, you can learn all about the program, sign up your local elected officials, and get a really super special discount because you're a listener to this podcast.
I love it. Hey, if you are a city manager with a social media problem, check out Sam Tolles at civysocial.com/AAME. All right. I'm Joe Turner, and this is the City Manager Unfiltered podcast, a podcast for city managers and other public sector executives. It is the most influential local government podcast in America. And with me today is Mitch Hammes. He is the code enforcement guy, or he is that code enforcement guy. You can find him at thatcodeenforcementguy.com. And he's worked himself up all through the ranks. He started as a code enforcement officer back in the day in California, and then he worked himself all the way up to a director of code enforcement, or the department that handled the code enforcement function in his community in Colorado Springs. And we're going to talk about code enforcement today because, as you guys all know, I've mentioned it numerous times, I'm a big fan of code enforcement. Doesn't mean I'm a big fan of all the problems and aggravations that come with it, but I've long touted the benefits and the value of leveraging your code enforcement department to benefit your community, right? I think it touches every aspect of your community when it comes to quality of life and so forth and so on. So with me today is Mitch Hammes. He's that code enforcement guy. And Mitch, welcome to the program.
Hey, thanks, Joe. So great to be here.
Absolutely. Why don't you tell folks a little bit about your background? I know I gave a little bit of a tease, but you're doing something a little bit different now that I didn't mention. So why don't you bring people up to speed with what you're working on?
Yeah, so I got involved in the American Association of Code Enforcement and started talking at their conferences, training some code enforcement officers back in 2022. And the interesting thing that has happened since then is I get a lot of calls from city managers or other department directors, and they're wondering, how do I know if my code enforcement department is really being effective? How do I know if I'm getting the return on investment that I'm spending? And why do I get so many complaints from residents about my code enforcement department? Is there something going on that I need to fix? And so that's what I've spent the last couple of years doing, is just trying to convey, here's really what code enforcement's about in municipalities. And here's how you can make sure that you're serving the community in the way they want to be served, in the way that benefits both the municipality, the city leadership, as well as the residents and the code enforcement officer. The reality is if they don't feel passion for the job, they're not going to be doing it the way we want it done for your community. And letting the city manager recognize what are the signs when somebody's having some difficulty in their job, and what can we do to make them better?
Yeah. And one of my big gripes too, Mitch, is that I think that code enforcement departments get short shrift a lot, and that they are given this sort of Herculean task, this impossible task of doing all these different functions and these obligations and carrying out these different tasks. But yet, time and time again, they're given so few resources to handle it, not only from a monetary standpoint, but then they also are not really supported from a leadership or management perspective too often. And so when the heat comes, as it invariably will, because code enforcement is one of those special departments that just pisses off a lot of people, and we'll unpack that here in a minute, it's very easy for the council and leadership to essentially effectively hang code enforcement out to dry because of the heat that comes from these violations and the people who are complaining about it.
Yeah, when people think about code enforcement, they think about the tall weeds or the grass or the trash and litter and debris, that kind of stuff. Really what that is, that's just the symptom that we see. The real problem, and what code enforcement, when it's done correctly, what we're trying to do is interact with the individual to solve those problems And if you haven't worked in this profession, it's like, well, how hard can it be to get them to just cut the grass or pick up the trash? It shouldn't be that big of a deal. City managers deal with a whole lot of people in their communities that lots are happy, lots are not happy. Initially, people are not happy when code enforcement shows up because they're expecting a heavy hand. And what I preach and what I train the people I work with on is show up and be a problem solver. Don't focus on how it got that way. Try to get them to decide that they want to fix it. Because once somebody decides they're going to do something and it's their idea, it's much easier for them to have the buy-in to solve that problem. The key with code enforcement is that your staff, unlike other departments, is we generally have the time to have those conversations. We have the time to critically think through a situation and find out what is the right solution to this, or what is the right next step, versus, like my friends in law enforcement who, they get a call, they have to go out and somebody's beating somebody and they have to take quick action.
Yeah. Or they're also mandated by state law to carry out a certain function or arrest, right? I mean, I think frontline code enforcement officers, generally speaking, in most organizations, or they should, have tremendous latitude, right, to kind of handle the situations as best as they see fit. Is that fair to say?
Oh, absolutely. I have said for a long time that code enforcement's the best job in the world. If you like,
I don't know a lot of people who are saying that, Mitch.
From my perspective, if you like being outside, you can choose when you want to be outside. If you like talking to people, if you like solving problems, this is the job, because we deal with just about every department in the city. We're pretty adaptable, pretty versatile. We're not subject matter experts. We're not building bridges. We're not doing capital improvement projects. But what we are is drawing on the expertise of those folks when we get pulled into a situation where we need an expert.
Yeah.
And then the more situations we get in, the more knowledge we have, and the more tools we find that are available to help the property owner solve their problem.
Yeah. And before we get too deep into this conversation, Mitch, I want to let the audience know, because obviously most of my audience is going to be executive level leaders, is that we're not going to get into the weeds of the individual granular nature of code enforcement. Where we want to focus at a higher level as far as how we can bring value to you as an executive when it comes to better understanding your code enforcement department and maybe tackling the problems or issues that you're facing or encountering. And one of the reasons why I'm really excited about having Mitch on the program is because he went all the way from being on the ground, boots on the ground enforcement to that department head level reporting to the executive. And you obviously, I'm sure, have some pretty strong opinions and feelings about code enforcement in general. And I'm really kind of want you to talk to me sort of as me being the avatar of sorts for the city managers, the county managers throughout the country. What do we want to share? What do you want to share with the executives and help them better understand about code enforcement? Because the reality is very few code enforcement directors ever become city managers. It's not the hotbed, so to speak, or the inside track to the executive chair. And so many city managers don't have any experience directly when it comes to code enforcement.
Yeah. So just to unpack that a little bit, is that I always like to say we are dealing with people. The situation that gets called in is just what gets us there. And so to be effective, or to understand what your code enforcement officers are facing, as a city manager, why am I receiving this complaint? Why is this resident calling and complaining to me about them? The majority of the time, what I found is that there's just a little bit of a lack of empathy on the behalf of the code enforcement officer, or they're so focused on getting the code requirements out that they're not listening to what's the resident facing right at this moment. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. In one respect, you're saying that the code enforcement officers can easily become so sort of tunnel vision locked into the task at hand that they can forget about the human component of the equation.
Right. It's real easy to look, if you've never worked in code enforcement, to say, well, how hard can it be to do 30 inspections a day? Or why is it taking so long? We look at the matrix, but what does not get factored into that is the people component. Sometimes you have to sit and listen to people a little bit longer to get their buy-in and then move forward. Other times, there's something complicated that a code enforcement officer might not deal with on a regular basis. Visibility triangles, or maybe some complicated long-standing land use issues or something like that takes some time to research. And if you're a new code enforcement officer, those things are pretty daunting. And recognizing when if something's getting put on the back burner repeatedly, that's when somebody needs to walk in and say, hey, do you need a little bit more training? What's the problem here?
Is there a rough sort of rule of thumb of like, okay, most departments fall into this category, or this category when it comes to a basic departmental assessment?
Yeah, when we look at that, we look at what's the priority of the department, or what does the city manager consider the priority? And there's basically four categories. It would be education. Is that what we want to do for our community? Do we want to really spend a lot of time and effort educating the folks that are here so that they understand the what and the why of code enforcement and what the city requires of them when it comes to property maintenance or registration of rental properties or something like that? The second issue that we might want to look at is, do we want to prioritize problem resolution? In that case, code enforcement cases might go on a little bit longer. It might take longer to resolve from the time we get the complaint until it's in compliance. But we've looked at a more permanent type resolution, something that's not going to happen, that's not going to recur. The third one would be behavior modification. That's if we're dealing with somebody who's a chronic violator. What is it going to take to get that person to buy into what we as a city feel is a priority, or when it comes to their property or their activities at that property, what's acceptable, what's not. The fourth one would be the judicial and punitive enforcement. We came out, we saw a violation, here's your ticket, pay the fine or go to court. And there are some agencies out there where that's the priority, is just write them a ticket and get them in there. The most effective code enforcement organizations that I've worked with and that I've consulted with really focus on the problem resolution, which leads into more of the behavior modification. Because if we can help the property owner, and I'm not saying give them resources, but if we can help them understand or overcome the situations that are causing them to violate the city code, then we can move forward. And then we've basically invested the time up front in the process, and we're not coming back on a regular basis.
Right. But is there any sort of community demographics or parameters that tend to lead one to be more successful than the other? Like, for example, you have a lot of communities that are very working class, or they might be lower middle class, or even on the socioeconomically, they can be really impoverished depending on the situation. And those create different challenges, I would imagine, than say another community that might be a little upper scale or upper end when it comes to household income and whatnot. Are there anything that you sort of look to as far as guidelines for how you might want to triage or assess your community, your department, and what might be the best approach? Or is it all just independent and dictated by the council's expectations and the city manager's job carrying out those expectations?
I would say it's a little bit of both. What do the elected officials desire? If they want the perfectly manicured lawns and that's the highest priority, and we don't care what it takes to get, then that makes code enforcement's job a little bit harder, because we don't have the latitude, or we don't feel like you have the latitude to move in a different direction. As far as demographics, yeah, if you're living on a property with grass front yards and you got a lot and you can't afford a landscaper, your mower broke and you're living paycheck to paycheck, that makes it super difficult. And that's where allowing your code enforcement staff, and I don't want to say unlimited amounts of time, you want to make sure you still have productivity,
right?
But understanding that what it takes is those personal contact, that conversation, and then working out what we can do. When I worked in the city of Phoenix, we had a tool loan program. And so we ran into a lot of situations where it was a lower income neighborhood, or somebody was facing some financial difficulty. They just didn't know that they could come borrow a lawnmower completely free from the city, pick it up on one day and return it 2 days later. If a community has the resources where you can start doing that, that's fantastic. The other thing that I would do as a code enforcement officer when I'd be driving through my neighborhoods is, if there was a lawnmower at a yard sale, I'd stop and talk to the property owner, say, hey, you want to donate this to our tool loan program? It's completely free. We take care of it. And that helps the community that needs it.
Yeah.
And then, of course, making sure that I would say one of the biggest benefits for your code enforcement department is make sure those code officers know what other resources are available in the community. As there are housing grants or home repair loans or grants or something like that, so that when really the code enforcement is the boots on the ground. And if they have all the information they need, not just about what code enforcement is responsible for or can make you do, but what other options are there, then you have that person basically selling those programs to people who might not go looking for them themselves.
Well, and that goes into that key element of that problem resolution structure, right? Because if you're helping to solve a systemic issue or problem by exposing or educating this resident to a potential program or grants that might be available, then hopefully that's going to solve the problem for the foreseeable future, and you're not having to do repeat visits out there, right?
Absolutely. And really that's what it's about, is what does it take to get this person, I don't want to say on their feet, but get them to the point where they recognize the benefit for them maintaining their property.
So, as a former director, you weren't the director of code enforcement. You were the director of neighborhood services in Colorado Springs, which had a code enforcement division within it, right? And how big was that department, and what was the size of that?
So when I started in 2016, we had 15 full-time people. When I left in 2024, we had 37 full-time people, and they were not all code enforcement officers. When I left, I had the team of 13 people who they cleaned up homeless camps, they remediated graffiti, they did building board ups, and lots of other small projects. And then we also oversaw the contract for the animal law enforcement with the Humane Society.
Okay.
As we grew from 15 to 37, so did our focus areas. Kind of came to a point where there was a problem identified in the city. We didn't know who to give it to. So maybe neighborhood services can get something started or can play a part in it.
Okay. What were the things that you experienced as a director of that department that you would communicate, or you would like to communicate with other executives listening, as far as to be aware of? Because obviously you are trying to accomplish multiple objectives as a department head, and of course you need the resources to do it. But what do you think are some of the most misunderstood aspects, or just not really things that are appreciated about code enforcement by the executive team?
From my experience, it's kind of like, oh, Mikey will eat it, right? It's like, I'll just get it off my plate, and we don't really care what happens to it. And then the successes go unnoticed. They don't get promoted in the community. And then I don't want to say not a respect for it, but other executives and other directors just don't see the benefit that you provide. It's real easy to get tunnel vision.
Is it fair to say that almost some people don't feel like code enforcement's a real division, or I guess, or a real department in the organization? Almost feel like it's the redheaded, stepchild of the organization.
I've experienced that, yes.
Yeah.
And it's just because, they just deal with overgrown grass, or they just deal with trash or an inoperable vehicle, something like that. But when you don't address it, or when there are areas of town where it's not proactively taken care of, that's when you see significant blight, and then the broken window theory kicks in, and that kind of stuff. So that's really where I think the priority needs to be for a city manager is, and I'm not saying give all the resources to code enforcement, but try to recognize the people that are doing the work and the benefit that the community receives from that work. Does that make sense?
It does makes absolute sense. I'm thinking back, honestly. When's the last time I read a story in the newspaper about code enforcement doing a good job, or getting positive results, or have any sort of positive news coverage illustrating the positive impact of code enforcement on the quality of life for the community, or property values and lowering crime and all that stuff? It's really fascinating when you think about it, because I do think there's an element of the redheaded stepchild syndrome with code enforcement in an organization, and yet, honestly, I think that it permeates every aspect of the organization and helps every other department be better, right? Whether it's public works, whether it's health and human services, when at the county level, law enforcement, obviously, when it comes to crime, we're talking about abandoned buildings, vacant buildings, dilapidated buildings in the fire department in terms of vandalism and arson, things of that sort of nature. It goes on and on. And so I really think it's an aspect of the equation that gets overlooked so often. And I think the reason why that is, and well, I know the reason why it is because it's a third rail in a lot of communities, because in order to be truly effective with code enforcement, you don't just have to give the resources, but you also have to you have to empower the department with the authority to do its job. And the way you empower that department is by backing its play, by supporting it when times get tough and you have people who complain. And invariably, people are going to complain when code enforcement is actually proactively doing its job. If you have a code, you might disagree with me, Mitch, on this one, right? And I know you're one of your big things is you want to preach, proper education and training so you can minimize complaints from the citizenry when it comes to code enforcement. And I don't want to dismiss that, but for most departments out there, if you're not getting complaints about your code enforcement, what the hell are they doing? Are they even doing their job? Right? I mean, that's the catch-22 of it all.
Exactly. And here's the interesting thing about code enforcement that probably doesn't apply to many other departments in a city is that we should always be getting complaints. Either you're being too hard on me or you're not being hard enough on my neighbor.
Right.
And so if there's not feedback from the community about the code enforcement program, then that's when something's wrong. What you really want to look at is, is it getting too one-sided?
Right.
Are we hearing that code enforcement is too hard on the residents that they have to enforce on, and there's not an equal amount on the other side?
Yeah.
The other thing to think about too is that a lot of people think, well, big deal. Code enforcement's out there telling people to do what they should do. So if they get them to do what they should do, that's like the minimum expectation.
Mm-hmm.
And so why do we need to celebrate a positive result when you're just getting them to do what they're expected to do?
Yeah, just doing their job, right?
Right.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, the kid took out the garbage. That's his chore, right?
Right.
Why do I need to praise him for it?
Right.
The difference in code enforcement is the effort it takes to get that person, that resident, to get to that expected minimum level of maintenance or participation in the community.
Yeah, absolutely. So, when I look at organizations in my experience who have, like I said, that spurt of activity, then it goes dormant in that spurt of activity. And then obviously there's other organizations that are a little bit more consistent and what have you, or maybe they're just, they're kind of just doing the bare minimum as an organization, just enough to sort of justify their existence, but they're not really moving the needle either. What do you say to, say, an executive who wants to tackle code enforcement or assess their code enforcement department? Like, what's the scheme? What's the thought process? How do you triage the situation? I'm gonna run you through an example. I don't know how appropriate it is for a lot of the executives listening, because again, I was in some very small communities who did not have very much of a code enforcement presence, right? And so I'm gonna walk you through my experience, and maybe you can grade me in what I was doing. Okay.
Oh, perfect.
So again, small town, we're talking, 2,000, 2,500 people, very little code enforcement activity prior to my arrival, if any, right? And yet I would have the governing body say, hey, we want to clean up the city. It's not looking too hot. We want to do some code enforcement. Or in one case, I was the one that was kind of aggressively doing it because I wanted to clean up the town and I didn't like the way things were looking. And because, again, I have that bias for action and belief that the code enforcement actually provides immense value to the organization, to the community as a whole. My first step was to say, okay, well, this is what we're going to do. We're not just going to start attacking every single code enforcement violation that we see. We're going to focus on, say, the abandoned vehicles that are out there and on these properties, right? And so then you would kind of go through systematically and go through the entire community. And again, this is a small community, so you can kind of do a pretty good once over for a specific issue. And then you tackle that issue and then you move on to the next one, as opposed to, going, say, quadrant by quadrant, which is another, I think, strategy. Some people try to maybe start with a region or they try to hit every violation in that region. What are your thoughts on how a small town manager might want to activate a code enforcement mechanism or department?
So my advice would be, what are the top 3 issues you see? Is it inoperable vehicles, or is it chipping and peeling paint, or what do you see as the biggest area of blight or the biggest element of blight? And then where is it? Because if you're in a small community, and I've worked with several, people drive down Main Street because they're going from one town to the next one. So focus on what people see. People don't see the house at the end of the cul-de-sac unless they live on that cul-de-sac. Mm-hmm. So that can be down the road. When we get to that point, that's a good point to be. It's focus on the collector streets, the arterial streets, the stuff that people normally see. Because what happens is when neighbors are maybe in a little bit larger community, when they see those common areas or the areas they see regularly starting to look better, then it could plant the seed that, hey, what's my part in this? And look at my house. And is there something I can do? The other thing,
Well, and the inverse, I guess, is it's kind of difficult to tell the person in the cul-de-sac to clean up their yard or to get the inoperable vehicle out of the driveway when you drive down Main Street and it looks like it's a shanty town, right?
Right.
I mean,
or you look at the city library and there's peeling paint and fascia boards that are
Yeah.
deteriorating and stuff
Yeah.
like that. You kind of got to clean up our own first. Doesn't have to be perfect, but yeah, that's where we're going with that.
so I'm kind of fascinated by this, Mitch, because one of the things that you will encounter, obviously, you know this when you do code enforcement, is why are you picking on me? Well, my situation is not nearly as bad as that person's situation, or how come you're not going after that property over there, right? So one of the things I find really fascinating about code enforcement is that it's impossible to attack every area of the city exactly the same way with the resources that these organizations do not have, right? They just don't have the manpower to go out and do that. What is your rebuttal if you say start proactively doing code enforcement in a community or an area that really hasn't had it for a while, and some of the residents start complaining about why are you picking on us and why aren't you going after them, or how come I got a notice of violation and yet my neighbor over here who's got an even quote unquote worse property didn't get a notice of violation?
And that's a great question. And we face that every day in this profession.
Every day.
Every single day.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not the worst one. You should go after the worst one. And my response for the last 20 years working in code enforcement is, that's really funny because that's what that guy told me about you. Right?
I never got to use that line before. That's great. That's a great one.
And then the other thing is a really good seasoned code enforcement officer or somebody who really has a passion for this job, even if they don't have years of experience, they're going to figure out a way to derail that conversation. It's not about your neighbor. It's not about who complained. It's about what we're dealing with on your property and you right now, and then moving forward with that. And so that's another way to tell, do you have really good, passionate code enforcement officers on your team? Are they really focused on basically selling the reasons why it's important to comply with the city code? Or are they just more, hey, check the box. Yep, I advised you that you have to cut your weeds and I'll be back. And if it's not, here's your ticket.
Man, I feel so scatterbrained on this episode because now I want to go down so many different rabbit holes of this conversation, but I feel like I'm getting disorganized with my thoughts because a second ago you just talked about basically hinting at the quality of your staff and the training and their mindset. There's that whole component, right? Which I'd love to go down that rabbit hole because we've all had experiences where some of our code enforcement officers think that they're wannabe police officers and they want to throw the book at the offenders, right? And then we also have the equation of proactive enforcement versus reactive enforcement in terms of where do you fall on that standpoint. So I want to go down that road for a second. What are your thoughts on organizations that engage in reactive enforcement, essentially complaint-driven enforcement, versus proactively going out and enforcing the code? Because that's two diametrically different approaches to code enforcement. And I think the more common one is that reactive complaint-driven approach. Is that fair to say?
It is very fair to say, and lots of places operate reactive only. And I don't promote that, but I don't promote 100% proactive. What I subscribe to is that we need to pay attention to the complaints, and we need to encourage our community to call in these complaints because that's telling us where the community wants us to be working. If we're driving through a neighborhood and it's the neighborhood's 10 years old and we're picking on somebody because their garage door's open 6 inches or, what are we really solving? But if we're, I don't want to say soliciting, but if we're encouraging the community, call in stuff that doesn't look right, then we know that we are putting our efforts towards those issues that the community sees as a problem. Now, when we go into that area, we don't want to look at house A and say, yep, they have peeling paint, so they get a notice, but next door, we didn't get a complaint about that, so we're not going to address it. No, we want to make sure that we're applying it evenly in that area.
Right.
Do we go to the end of the block or based on workload and resources, do we look at just the 2 houses on each side, the 3 across the street or something like that?
Yeah. It can be really, it's really subjective.
Right.
It depends. I mean,
and it's also important if you do subscribe to that, we're going to be proactive. What are we being proactive on? because that's that's got to be an important consideration. Because if we're going to be proactive on everything, do we really care if somebody's shed in their backyard is 3 feet in a 3-foot side back versus 5? If nobody's complained about it, what's the real issue?
Yeah.
But proactively, do we care that there's 4 inoperable junk cars sitting on the front yard, or do we care about peeling paint? And then making sure that the community, and this is where it comes back to your code enforcement manager, director, whoever's leading the program, or in a small community, the city manager, to say, look, this is a priority. We've identified these 3 things or these 4 things as the biggest blight in our community. And so we really encourage our community to fix those things proactively. But we're also going to come out and tell you, look at what we identified this on your house, and it's incumbent on you as a responsible community member here to take care of it.
What is your opposition to reactive only complaint driven enforcement?
Because then we're only going where somebody's willing to complain. And we're only going to I've worked with communities where they say, we're going to look at what was complained upon, and that's it. So it's only what your neighbor says is wrong. I will say, as a seasoned code enforcement officer, I can go out to probably 9 out of 10 homes have some kind of violation, right? But if I'm looking at, let's say the complaint is the junk car, but I notice some trash on the side of the house, it just doesn't make sense to ignore that stuff that I see is a significant violation just because somebody didn't recognize it or somebody didn't include it in the complaint.
This is something I've wrestled with, and everyone who's listening will know where I'm going with this, is that we all know that different aspects and areas of the community have different personalities and different tolerances for what is acceptable or not acceptable in terms of appearance, aesthetics, and violations, right? And it would be naive, right, for me to suggest that every neighborhood is going to get treated the same. Right? That just doesn't work that way, right?
No, it doesn't work that way.
Okay. And there's nothing wrong with an executive taking the approach that, hey, we're going to, well, let me ask you, I want to force feed you. Is it acceptable, in your opinion, for an executive in a code enforcement department to have separate and distinct standards based off of areas of that community?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Different communities have different standards, just like different neighborhoods within that community have different standards, and recognizing what's important to that specific neighborhood or that portion of the community. If there's a demographic where it's normal to have chickens running around, right, and nobody cares about that, well, in that part of town, is that something we really want to tackle?
Right.
Because what are we really what's our win in that? There is no win if if that neighborhood wants it and has no problem with it, and we're going in being heavy-handed, or we're going in taking that. Conversely, if it's a health and safety issue, right, or if it's something significant that we just can't overlook, this is harboring rodents and it's spreading to other neighborhoods. No, we have to address that.
Yeah. But there's a big difference between the one neighborhood where, fortunately or unfortunately, the garbage cans get left out a couple of days past the pickup date, and the other neighborhood where maybe they need to be in by sundown, right? I mean, there's a little bit of a difference there, right?
And there's got to be some perspective as well. I had a situation in my career where one particular neighborhood was very upset that trash totes were being left in the front of the house. They were supposed to be on the side or in the garage or something like that. And it was, 300 homes or 400 homes in this development. And as the manager, I had to say, we don't have the resources or the time to check and see where people are putting their trash can. The day we have that kind of resource is going to be a good day for all of us.
Yeah.
And so we as leaders have to be able to tell our community, it might be a violation, but it's not. It doesn't reach the level where we can justify
allocate resources.
Right. We can't justify those resources on something of that magnitude.
Yeah.
Now, if there's stuff spilling out over the top and food stuff and bears are getting into it or something else, that's a different story.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I do not like about reactive complaint-driven policies is I just inherently have an issue, or how do I articulate this? I'm not a fan of policy that kind of promotes or encourages other residents to complain on other residents. Like, I just don't feel like that's a really healthy place to be as a society. And I think one of the reasons why I've always supported and tried to encourage proactive enforcement, and as generally speaking, is to minimize that to a degree, because I just don't think that's really healthy and conducive to generating that sense of community and connectedness and what have you. Do you have any thoughts on that in a macro sense?
I do. And there are communities out there where they have a strict reactive only policy.
Yeah.
And I think that creates, for somebody who's really passionate about community development or code enforcement or planning, that really strangles them and prevents them from having the passion for this job. And so I think there needs to be a level of expectation that going completely reactive is not the best course of action, because then we have people sitting back in their truck with nothing to do, where they can see they see something they can do,
right?
And they're not, they're afraid of violating a policy and facing discipline for that.
I want to come back to that idea of the passion and making sure that you kind of keep the morale up for your employees and have that passion and the desire to do the job, because I think it's very easy for that passion and motivation to get snuffed out based off of either the lack of support from leadership, whether it's from the executive office or from the governing body. But I want to finish the conversation a little bit more and dissect the proactive and other sorts of ways of handling these cases. So when you go to the other pendulum, right, and just say, hey, we're going to do nothing but proactive enforcement, right? Well, I guess in a sense, you're always going to do some reactive, because whenever a complaint comes in, you're gonna follow
Sure.
it. But what are some of the pitfalls of the proactive approach to code enforcement?
The pitfall is you could have staff that are focusing on the wrong things. You could have
looking for something,
or they bring their personal bias into it.
Okay.
And then, it's not the junk car, or it's not the trash that they're trying to solve. Now it's the person who has the detached carport over their driveway or something like that. And I have tons of stories where code enforcement officers have gone in because they don't like one thing, and that's what they focus on. And that's not good for a community either, because you don't need one person who's solely focused on, hey, I'm this one issue and I'm going to eradicate that from the city.
Right.
Because that just doesn't, it doesn't.
They're on a mission, right?
Right,
They're on a mission from God to get rid of all the abandoned vehicles or whatever. They're
exactly.
vacant vehicles
or
or
the carports,
or inoperables.
or,
Yeah.
The fences that are 7 feet instead of 6 feet, or
Yeah,
something like
yeah,
that. Yeah.
Getting back to the morale and passion and whatnot, I do think that it's such a very delicate fine line in code enforcement, more so than most other departments. I mean, I think obviously police department, there's a lot of parallels, and I want to get into a further dissection of that issue later on in this interview. But I feel like code enforcement as a department, it's one of the easiest departments to really just kill morale and destroy the motivation when you have poor leadership, or leadership that's coming down and not giving the resources and not supporting staff in that role. Can you speak to that?
I can, and this is the part of the job that I love talking about. An organization I worked with when I started with them, they had a set of general orders and a set of SOPs, and that's what we worked by. And I said, this is not conducive to solving problems. And so what I did is and every organization has to have a matrix, right? We have to be able to measure performance. But what I put in place was, as long as we respond promptly to the initial complaint and then find compliance or resolution at the end, everything in between those two benchmarks, that's where the code enforcement officer gets to use their own unique skills and talents and abilities. And that's where their passion for this position grows. If you have somebody who just loves writing tickets and loves being that punitive,
the hammer,
yeah,
right?
they wanted to be in an enforcement capacity, fantastic. Put them on those cases with people that we've had to hammer before who don't get with the program. We love it.
The hard cases.
Yeah. The ones where you're going to be writing an abatement warrant and you're going to be going out and taking their stuff. If that's what they love doing, then focus them on that job. If it's something where they love finding unique resolutions to problems, or unique solutions, or they love bringing in probationers to do community service and cleaning up this area, or that kind of stuff, then focus that personality on the opposite end of the spectrum.
Is that typical though, Mitch? Because I would think, generally speaking, first of all, that sounds, how do I say this? That sounds like it takes a lot more effort on the part of the director of the department than, say, just assigning one member to a specific quadrant or neighborhood or geographic area, right? I mean, is it more often than not a department assigns their code enforcement officers to maybe by a geographic sort of designation? Is that the most common way of doing it?
That's common in standard.
Yeah.
You work in sector A and you handle everything in sector A.
But you're suggested that maybe that's a completely needs to be turned on its head and changed.
Not completely.
No? Okay.
But like what I did when I was faced with this situation, I reduced the number of sectors in our city from I think it was from 10 to 5.
Okay.
But I assigned 2 code enforcement officers to each sector. And what that did is that allowed them to cover for each other when they're on vacation, that kind of stuff. And it also allowed us to create a tier system or a step program where you have a little bit more experience. Now you're a senior and you're handling a little more difficult cases or something that takes a little bit more time. And what I found was the employee turnover was greatly reduced. So when you said, it takes more time or it takes more effort, it's not any more effort than recruiting a new code enforcement officer and training that guy.
A great point. Turnover's a beast, right? It really destroys a lot of the...
Right.
Yeah.
And code enforcement is not a position where you're at the top of the pay scale. You know, you're not up in that upper level of city stuff. It's a great job. It pays well, but there are times where somebody will say, "Hey, I can make more money working at Chick-fil-A or,
or a lot less hassle.
Sam's Club." Yeah. And I clock in
or maybe
and
you're not
clock out.
making more money, but you ain't dealing with a lot of the hassles and the headaches that come with the... I mean, let's be honest. You're a code enforcement officer. Every day is a grind in a lot of respects, right?
Oh, yeah. I had an old, one of the best supervisors I ever worked for. He said, "Look, some days you're the villain, some days you're the hero, but most days you're both to somebody."
Yeah.
And you got to have that personality. You got to have that thick skin, and you got to go home at the end of the day saying, there's people that might not like me in the community, but I did what I had to do, and I feel confident about what I did.
So as a former frontline code enforcement officer, right, what would you say to the executives who are listening? What do those individuals need in order to thrive, to feel motivated, dedicated, that want to be excited about coming to work? I know it was a very general blanket statement because every individual has different needs and whatnots, but as a general rule, what does the frontline code enforcement officer need from the executive team and the council in order to feel fully engaged and conscious or present with their position?
Celebrate the successes. And the success is when you had that property that just looked like it came off an episode of Hoarders, and now it's done. And maybe the renters are gone or the owners have flipped it, and now we don't have to deal with it. It comes back to, well, you got them to do what we said they needed to do. We need to celebrate that, because a lot of times the effort that code enforcement officers put into finding compliance or reaching solutions is not really recognized, because the house now looks like the one right next door.
Yeah.
And we move on.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I encourage all code enforcement officers to do is when somebody says, "Hey, thank you," to tell them, "Hey, I appreciate that, but please call my boss or my city manager, or in a small community, call your council member and let them know how happy you are with us, with what we did."
Yeah. You mean the neighbors who are happy with the response?
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very
Yeah.
good point.
Mhm.
Because they seldom ever call in to express gratitude and appreciation,
Right.
because you just did your job, right?
Yeah.
But man, that praise would go a long way, because so often the city manager or the elected officials are only hearing the attacks from those who are upset. And
Right.
usually those are the worst offenders.
And I would tell you, if I was in a city manager role and didn't have any experience with code enforcement, I would ask the person who's in charge of that team, say, "Hey, who's done a good job lately and why?" And give and get a specific address, and then go out there and say, "Hey, I looked at your case notes. I looked at your photographs. Great job." Even if it's just you got that junk picked up, or you got that.
You mean actually going out to do an on-site visit with the residents?
No,
No?
that would be fantastic. But I meant like to have the city manager call the code officer and say, "Hey,
gotcha.
Okay.
Okay.
that abatement you did at 1142 Server Drive.
Okay.
Great job on that."
Yeah.
It takes 30 seconds, but you would be amazed at how many times code enforcement officers are, I don't want to say killing themselves, but they put forth a lot of consistent effort to get something done, and then nobody recognizes it.
Yeah, there's nothing. Yeah. Very, very, very good point. What are some other ways? What are some other, I guess, maybe interesting ways or things that you've seen over the years of how a department can recognize the accomplishments and achievements of those code enforcement officers. I mean, obviously, there's probably a city council recognition during a meeting, but let's be honest. I mean, how many code enforcement officers? Again, this is unfiltered, right?
Right.
How many code enforcement officers want to come in on their after work hours and come into a city council meeting and sit and listen to the Pledge of Allegiance and some the consent agenda before getting to a proclamation or something about what a great job I did, right? I mean, what are some other things that we can do to reward these individuals?
So there's a lot of training opportunities. Most states have code enforcement associations, or there's the American Association of Code Enforcement. They put on an annual conference, and rewarding somebody to go get some more training, that sounds like it sounds maybe not like too much of a reward. Here's the thing: most code enforcement officers, unless you're in a super big city, you're a department of one, or you have one or two or three other coworkers, and so you're limited to what you can think up. How do we do this job better between the three of us?
Right.
If you're given 2.5 days to go to the state capitol or wherever they're holding the conference and network with other code enforcement officers, it's amazing the stuff that you will hear. I was up in Manhattan, Kansas just yesterday, and there was one code enforcement officer, Tim, who said, "You know what I do for inoperable vehicles? If people are telling me they're working on them, I just print out a piece of paper that says code enforcement knows about this, and we are aware of it, and should be fixed by X amount of time, and ask the vehicle owner, put it in your front window."
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh my gosh, how many times neighbors walking by that see it, and the car's been there for 3 months or 6 months, and they've called code enforcement. They don't see anything.
Yeah.
Yet with the agreement of that vehicle owner, now the resident walking by looks and says, "Oh, code enforcement is working on that, and here's what we expect."
And I think most people are, generally speaking, pretty accommodating, right? I mean, if they know somebody's working on a problem and they're working on the car and it's going to take them some time, I think there's some pretty good latitude there, right? Obviously, we don't want the new tires and the oil change to take a year to get done or whatever, But I think if there's an idea that the code enforcement department is actively engaged with that resident, then there's okay, we can let it go, right?
And the point I was bringing up with that story was that I've been in code enforcement over 20 years. How come I never thought of that?
Mm-hmm.
And it took coming to Kansas to talk with another guy who said, "Hey, this is what I do," and I'm like, "That is brilliant." And now I can go back
and share that with others. Yeah.
Share it with others. Or if I'm a code enforcement officer that got to come to this 2 days of training, now I'm going to go back and I'm going to bring back ideas. If I'm passionate and if I am engaged in this profession, like we want, I'm going to go back and say, "Hey boss, look at what they're doing over in, Derby."
Yeah.
Or look at what they're doing in Billings, Montana. We should do something similar. That really boosts morale.
Well, I think I don't have a study at hand or off memory, but I've seen numerous times where one of the things that is most appreciated from employees, whether it's public sector or private sector, is reinvestment in training into them so they can help level up their skills, right? And I think there's an implicit message you're sending, not only to that person that you're sending to the training, like, "Hey, we value you and we appreciate what you're doing," but you're also giving them that organizational cue, right? That we are supporting what you're doing and we value the mission that you're trying to accomplish, and we're with you on that.
Exactly. And as a department director, one of the things that I always try to do when I send people to training is come back and say, "What'd you learn?
Mm-hmm.
What'd you find out?" Because if I send you to training and then forget about it, it sends the message that, well, I got to go do this, but does my boss or does the department or the city see the value in it? Are they even interested?
Right.
Or did they just say, "Oh yeah, go ahead and send them on training and let's move on to something else"?
Well, and I think a lot of times there's a perception, rightfully so, I would say, that a lot of these conferences can be kind of fluffy and have little value to them, and they're just more like little mini sort of vacation getaways. So if you can actually come back and communicate the value you've gained or learned, or the perspectives or insights, and how you can help create value for the organization and step up for the taxpayers, that's a very powerful message, not only for that individual to communicate to the department head, but for the department head to communicate to the executive, and ultimately for the executive to communicate to the governing body.
Exactly. And then recognizing that, there's a lot of differences in different state laws. There's a lot of things that you can do here that you can't do in Florida.
Mm-hmm.
And so if somebody's coming in and they're, 6 months on the job, maybe they're not ready to go to a national conference yet, but they can certainly go to your state association.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe you my policy was I really don't send you to train out of state trainings until after you've been here 3 years.
Yeah, because you don't want to invest do I really want to invest that money in somebody who might be here today and gone tomorrow, right?
Not only that, but you don't really have a solid basis of understanding,
Fair
I
enough.
believe, in code enforcement until you've been on the job 3 years, right? And so once you've been here 3 years and you've experienced some conflict, you've experienced some wins, you've experienced some grief, that we deal with people in all stages of emotions. And so after 3 years, you've kind of learned when empathy is appropriate and when you're being taken advantage of.
Mm-hmm.
So after that 3-year mark is when you're really going to benefit from talking with people in other states or that kind of stuff.
I just had a thought pop into my head, Mitch. I'm sure in your years of being in this business, you've seen some wide-eyed, naive young code enforcement officers come in and get played by some of the problem childs of the community, right?
Oh, my one's sitting right across from you right now. Yeah, and we all remember those situations. Say, oh man, what was I thinking?
Man, they took me to school on that one, right?
Yep,
Gosh, and then they turn into grizzled veterans, and maybe maybe get the flip side. They can be a little bit too jaded sometimes, right?
That happens occasionally as well. Yes.
So we talked a little bit about the rank and file, right? For the executives who are listening to kind of be conscious of what their needs are, and you're saying, hey, recognition and training are two of the best things you could do to really show value and appreciation for those individuals that are doing this very difficult job, right? When it comes to organizations that are large enough to have a department head overseeing the code enforcement function, do you have any advice or counsel for those executives as far as what they should look for in a department head?
I would say look for somebody who is people oriented. And not just the management analyst who got his MPA and he's progressing through the ranks. I worked with somebody like that in one organization, and what came out of that person's head might have went well in public works or went well in a different organization. But if you're looking at employing somebody as a department head who's going to oversee this, make sure they have had some time in the field or have had some kind of experience, whether it's in code enforcement or in private industry before they came or something like that, where it involves a little bit of salesmanship. It involves a little bit of critical thinking and analytical.
And customer service, right?
Customer service.
And that social, maybe not being socially awkward, right? I mean, because you need somebody who knows their way around navigating that human nature, the components, the different personality types, right?
And you need somebody with a little bit of emotional intelligence who can recognize some cues that, hey, this resident we're dealing with, it might not, the anger or the frustration or whatever we're dealing with might not just be about code enforcement or about that junk car. It's about something else.
Yeah. That's a very fair point, because I think code enforcement, unlike many other departments, you really do need that person who can deal with people in a very effective way, because not only they got to deal with the residents in the different stakeholder groups that you're going to encounter outside the organization, but they also have to deal with all the different personality types of the code enforcement officers. And I say that because code enforcement officers, again, I want to sing this. I want to sing the praises of the code enforcement officers. Man, these people are getting beat up on a daily basis. So there's times, I'm sure, where you have to be the motivational coach and the counselor and the therapist for some of these individuals who are getting the shit kicked out of them on a daily basis.
Yeah, and it's emotional shit kicking.
Yeah.
It's not, oh, I got in a fist fight with the guy I was trying to arrest or something like that. It's the resident that calls the code officer every single day and leaves a voicemail. Yeah, how do you live with yourself at doing this job? And all of that kind of stuff.
Yes.
And those are real things that do happen. And over time, that can really wear on a code officer who says, is it worth it? Maybe they still love the job, but they're not fully committed. They come in, they do the minimum, they follow the policy, they do just enough not to get some discipline or something like that. And then the morale is down. The morale goes down. They vent to their coworker. They vent to somebody in the community. You're in a small community. You're talking to your brother at dinner. You don't know who's in the booth behind you.
Yeah. 100%.
And that it just spirals at that point.
Yeah. I didn't even think about that until you mentioned it, but I understood in macro sense the emotional toll of the job can have on somebody or their psyche. But you're right. You have individuals who will play the victim card and they try to guilt trip you and beat you down. And like you said, say, how dare you, come after us for these these violations, and you know what you're doing to our family, and so forth and so on. And meanwhile, the code enforcement officer is saying, I'm just doing my job. I'm just trying to do my job to the best of my ability, and it's nothing personal.
Yeah, and lots of times the code enforcement officer lives 3 blocks away.
Yeah.
Or 5 blocks away. It's not they're not living in the big white house up on the hill. They're not removed from the community.
Right.
They're community members as well.
Well, hey, I think that's going to do it for this episode. I think we'll come back and do another one, Mitch. Mitch Hammes, he is that code enforcement guy at thatcodeenforcementguy.com. He is the subject matter expert on all things code enforcement. Real quick, Mitch, before we leave, why don't we tell them one more time what you do, what kind of services you offer for local governments?
Yeah, for city managers, I would just say if you're having difficulty or you wonder if your code enforcement department or your staff is doing the right thing, give me a call. We can talk about it. If you're looking for an agency review or a department audit, I can do that for you. If you are just looking for, hey, where are the training resources? I can come out and deliver training. If you're looking for, does my state have an association, or where can I send these people, or just really any question you have, just reach out to me, and I'd love to have that conversation with you. I think code enforcement, generally speaking, is underrepresented when it comes to the city management and city issues, and that's really all I'm trying to do is, let's bring, we're not building bridges and we're not arresting the bad guys, but we do have a valuable piece.
You're building different types of bridges.
Well, oh yeah, there we go. But it is it can be a very valuable element of community of a city that provides exceptional return on investment.
Absolutely, absolutely. And for full disclosure and transparency with my audience, Mitch and I do not have any business relationship. There's been no compensation. I do not have any affiliate arrangement. I just wanted to put him out there. As you guys know, I'm a big fan of code enforcement. I think it can add tremendous value to your organization, your community. I've talked about it before when I had Gavin Baum-Blake with City Detect on the podcast, and I've talked about it in other episodes too. I really do think that code enforcement can have a positive impact in virtually every aspect of your community. And I think it's something that a lot of communities miss the mark on, frankly, when it comes to effectively handling their code enforcement division or department, and don't give enough resources or proper support to. So with that, we're going to wrap it up. I'm Joe Turner. This is the City Manager Unfiltered podcast, a podcast for city managers and other public sector executives. With me today has been Mitch Hammes. He is that code enforcement guy. Again, you can catch him at
thatcodeenforcementguy.com.
There you go. Thank you for helping me out on that one, Mitch.
Thank you, Joe. Thanks for having me.
If you like the show, you like the program, please make sure you hit that follow, subscribe button on your platform of choice, and or leave a rating and review on your platform of choice. Thank you very much. Catch you next week.